Throughout today's episode, I had some internet connectivity issues. It's really rare, and I was frustrated because my guest, J.P. Smith, is one of the bigger names that has appeared on the podcast. He's published countless novels with mainline, big 5, big 6, big 20 kind of publishers, and has an amazing rip-roaring story about how he moved to England to jumpstart his flagging, in fact, it's not even a flagging career. He had no prospects of being a full-time, making a living kind of author. And so he picked everything up and moved to England, and his fates reversed overnight, pretty much. That's a cool story, so make sure you listen. That comes about the halfway mark. I left in some of the kind of buffering sounds in this episode. If I felt that you could hear what was being said, my sincerest apologies to J.P. Smith for some of the lower quality audio in this episode. My apologies to you, the listener. There was one bit that I cut out. I think it's kind of obvious that I had to stitch one bit to another. So if you hear that, again, my apologies. And it is sort of funny because I think it was a fairly good moment, but the world takes, the world gives, and you can't fight it. What else? I've got my novels out there in the world. You can grab The 9 Lives of Marva DeLonghi off of my website. I always have links in the show notes. You can grab it in any format you want. If you pre-order the audiobooks right now, you get a great deal, just $10 for 2 audiobooks, which is better than a month of Audible. Yes, so you get 2 audiobooks read by the very talented X.E. Sands. And then I want to whet your appetite for an upcoming episode. I'm going to drop it next Monday, and that episode is going to be a reverse interview. I reached out to one of my favorite writers, podcasters in the world. You may or may not know her. I've been a guest on her show about a year ago. Her name is Michelle Rado. She hosts the Daring to Tell podcast. It is a fantastic show. I've been a huge fan of it. I wait with bated breath. She doesn't have very many releases, typically just one a month. But her interviews are so insightful. She was a former producer and worked at a public radio station up in the Northeast. She's got that kind of voice. She's got that kind of insight. She has those heavy-hitting questions, and I'm just very enamored with everything that she does. Super excited that she agreed to read my book and then interview me on my show about my book, The 9 Lives of Marva DeLonghi. So if you are kind of curious to get an inside peek at the writing process, how I came up with the story, the long and arduous path that took me to get there, don't miss out on next Monday's episode. It's very, very fun. I loved making it. And also, in the meantime, if you're looking for another podcast, I highly encourage you, listen to Daring to Tell. It is a truly wonderful podcast. Now, without further ado, I'm going to let you listen to the wonderful and talented, exceptionally entertaining J.P. Smith.
If you've ever watched an author read in public and felt bored, TRBM is the antidote. It's what we do, talk about dogs, daughters, coffee, and writer's block. Now TRBM is for writers what time-lapse was for painters, guitar solos and spotlight were for bands, and what chainsaws and ice blocks were for sculptors. What does TRBM stand for? Turkey, rye, bacon, and mayo? Tomato, radish, and Brussels melange? Or tightly regional bold menus? That sounds delicious, but you decide.
Your first 5 novels were literary.
Yes. The Discovery of Light. Yes, Breathless, all literary, all the first 5. And then I went to Airtight, which is kind of a caper novel about based on something that happened to me in college, where there was a deal we made in Cincinnati. I went to college for 2 mistaken years in the Midwest. Another dreadful Southern Indiana at 1960s. Not a good place for a New Yorker like me to be. And we made a deal and bought a tremendous amount of very low-grade marijuana in Cincinnati. And brought it back to the college and realized the college is just full of fraternity boys and sorority girls, and nobody smoked grass. They just drank a lot.
Oh yeah.
And
Yep.
so we had to we buried it. We buried it
Oh my
in mason
gosh.
jars. And I had forgotten about it. And my wife and I were watching Jackie Brown, the Tarantino movie.
Hmm.
And these middle-aged guys, and they're getting involved in a caper. And I said, we never dug it up. I said, that's a script. That's a movie script. So I wrote it as a script.
That's
And then I
hilarious.
decided I'm going to write it as a novel. And so that it was a caper novel. And then I thought, again, influenced by a movie, we had seen this movie called The Gift
Hmm.
by Joel Edgerton, starring Jason Bateman and
Yes.
Joel Edgerton. And somebody from the past comes back. You taunted me, you made my life hell, and I'm going to get you.
Hmm.
And I thought, I was taking a walk with my wife, and I said, when I was in summer camp at 8 years old, a swimming counselor abandoned me on a raft. And I said,
Oh
what if he
wow.
had forgotten about me? And
Oh my
then I had
gosh.
disappeared. Because he said, you either swim back or you die. And I couldn't swim.
Wow. So that's
Okay.
a real story. That
So
actually
I said,
happened to you.
that those first, I don't know if you've read The Drowning,
Yeah, that was the one. So
but
you
it's,
recommended The Drowning to me.
oh,
So that was the one that I read most recently. But I mean, honestly, I read two
yeah.
of your books in about the span of a week. And The Drowning,
Okay.
that was a real story that happened to you, at least in terms of the inspiration of somebody leaving you on a raft, because that exact instance
Right.
happens in The Drowning.
Up until the moment I'm not there, that's all of that is true.
Wow.
When he threw me in the water and he threw me onto the raft and left me there. So I was 8 years old in summer camp then. And of course, back then, summer camp was 2 months long and there was no internet. You sent postcards home and
Yeah.
you were just there for 2 months. And I started camp when I was 7 years old.
Wow.
And I went to camp, different camps. I went to a camp with Andy Kaufman, was in the next bunk, comedian. And yeah, that is a true story,
That's crazy.
based on a true story.
Did you resent the counselor? So for me, one of the big questions about the novel The Drowning was, I will say I did not particularly care for, and I don't think I was supposed to care for the main character, the counselor who abandons the boy, because
No,
he's a jackass. He's
he is.
never likable, I don't think, in any way. However,
Yeah.
you still did something in the book that enabled me to root for him in a strange way, because I
Mhm.
would think to myself, okay, what if I did this terrible thing? Actually, I've never talked about this publicly before, but this is a true story that I did, and I still to this day feel some guilt for. I had a cat for a brief amount of time. She was a stray. She came up to me. I was still living in my dad's house, so I have to have been, let's say, 15 years old or so, smoking a cigarette outside late at night. And the cat comes up to me and I pet her and she's sweet and she's nice and I take her in. No, I have to be older because I needed roommates at that time. So it would have been between, sorry, it's hard to remember my own biography in some ways, between places. And I just stopped in with my parents again for a short amount of time. But I took that cat in and she was mine for a little while. I kept her a secret because my dad's wife said she was allergic to cats. And eventually I was able to take the cat with me to live with somebody for a period of time. But then I got some new roommates, and the roommates were absolutely no cat, no way. I didn't really have any other options. So I took that cat and I dropped her off in a trailer park of a friend that I had who used to live there. So I knew the place and I thought, she's really friendly, she'll be okay. And I drove away.
Mhm.
And I have felt terrible about that. I've never
Of
told
course.
anybody till I told my wife that several years ago, and I've never admitted it publicly until this point. How I think of myself in light of that choice is a bit like I sympathized with your character, how he felt leaving a boy alone on a raft in the middle of the water.
Yes.
He didn't see a lot of other choices. He thought he was doing the right thing for the boy.
Right.
And so I think his whole life kind of spins from that point. He holds this guilt, and it informs a lot of terrible choices that he starts to make, a little bit like Walter White in Breaking Bad or
Exactly.
something like
Breaking
that.
Bad, yeah,
So
of
anyways,
course.
I'll let you talk again, but I just wanted to share that was my entry into the book. I hated that guy, and yet I related to him, possibly because of my own personal experience.
Absolutely. The counselor was, I would say, most camp counselors were college kids, first year college kids, so he was maybe 18. I do remember that the counselor, as I was in the water drowning, I grabbed onto this chain around his neck and there was a St. Christopher medal on it. And I thought,
Oh
I
my
can't put that in the
gosh.
book. It's so on the nose.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah, I could not use that at all. But he was just this, redheaded guy. Sort of Trump reminds me of him. And and he said, he wanted to kill me because I let him down because I said I can't swim. So he throws me in the deep water. I was fine in other kinds of water, and basically cured me of ever wanting to swim for the rest of my life. So, he left me on the raft, and I thought that's an interesting story. I can develop that. The funny thing is that The Drowning has been my most successful book. I earned back my advance in America and in France. And in France, of course, you get press reviews, which is fabulous.
Yeah.
You get magazines and on the radio and that sort of thing. It's so different. The culture there is very different from America. People buy books, the actual books.
Yeah.
And it's now coming out. Well, see, it came out as their version of hardcover. It's called Brochet. It's a big trade paperback for 20 euros, a lot of money.
Yeah.
And then it comes out in a little pocket, a Gallimard edition, about a year later. And The Summoning is coming out in a pocket edition in France in about 2 weeks. And deals will go up again, which is nice. So yeah, The Drowning has been very good. It's very good to me.
When you run into these books where the main character is somebody that you, at the same time that you root for them, you hope they get their comeuppance in the end.
Yes.
That's such a pleasing experience. So I'd like to talk a little bit about your persona on Twitter. For a lot of people who listen to this podcast, Twitter is where they found me. I'm starting to kind of move away from Twitter a little bit not because I have any issues with Elon. In fact, I kind of like Elon and what he said he was going to do. It just turns out that Substack is the other half and the more lucrative half of what I do. And he started to be antagonistic to Substack. At any rate, I met you on Twitter. You comment a lot on the questions that I put out there, and in a thumbnail size, your avatar, your picture of yourself, actually, I would describe as appearing to be kind of a motorcycle riding kind of guy. That's just the feeling. I know that's the feeling I got from your avatar. And you have, I would say, a smart aleck kind of a tone to you at times that's really enjoyable. You're not afraid to kind of poke fun at silly ideas or things that you find to be silly. And that's really enjoyable for me. Talk to me about the persona that you built on Twitter, and because it's probably one of the biggest bits of marketing that you do for yourself, is my guess. You're traditionally published, so the publisher is doing a lot of marketing for you, hopefully, or some marketing for you. Talk to me about Twitter.
So basically, social media, when I was starting as a writer, and this was in England, basically, I started writing 50 years ago when I finished grad school. My goal until then was to be a rock star, which back then was a perfectly reasonable career choice in the 60s. Everybody wanted to be a rock star. And I played in a band. And I'm still friends with my drummer and my guitarist. And I thought I could do something with this. I was a bass player for quite a long time. And then I realized I'm not going to make anything out of this. And I had a master's degree in English. I just finished. And I said, I'm going to sit down and write. And when I was a little kid, my mother used to get the Saturday Review of Books and the New York Times Book Review and that sort of thing. And I'd look at all these photos of writers, and they just look cool. And I liked it, and I really loved doing it. And I wrote 12 books in 12 years
My goodness.
before I was ever published. And we left for England in 1977. The idea was to go there for a year, and I'm going to come to my social media thing in a sec. To stay a year, and we stayed over 5.
Wow.
Came back with a daughter. And so I had an agent immediately. And I also wrote a script because I was in touch with Beryl Bainbridge. We corresponded for about a year. Dame Beryl, as she was known later on. And she said, we're all writing scripts. We all write for television and for radio drama. And a few of us are doing some theater stuff. She said, you want to come armed with something else. So I wrote a TV script, and I immediately got an agent with that TV script. And she said, oh, if you're looking for an agent for your books, we're associated with one. So within 2 weeks of landing in England, I had 2 agents. Well, back in the States, I couldn't. It was terrible. It was horrible. That's why we moved to England. I thought maybe I could make my career there. So I became an English writer. The Man from Marseille it's written in British English. That's how I wrote it. And I wrote that in 5 weeks.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
My agent said, "This is the most marketable thing you've ever sent me," and he sold it 2 weeks
Oh my
later.
goodness. Wow. So it's funny
Yeah.
because you did you went where I was hoping to go just a little bit later in the podcast, which is you
Mhm.
had no real success or luck in the United States for quite a long time. You felt like you were banging your head against the wall. I'm pulling this directly from your bio online. And so you left for
Yeah.
England, and that is where you
Yeah.
found your agents. That's where you found success. That's where you published, and you were able to translate that success to some degree back into the United States and publishing here.
Right.
Keep
Mhm.
telling that story. I am interested in getting to Twitter, but since we came out at this angle, just keep updating us, because I think that my listeners would be fascinated with the idea of actually picking up your whole life and moving somewhere foreign to try, hey, let's take a last
Right.
stab at making a life of
Right.
this. In fact, I'm right there right now.
Exactly.
Like, what do I do? How do I turn these books into a living?
Yeah. It's very difficult. I mean, publishing has always been very difficult. Now there are many more options. Self-publishing, which is not something I want to
Mhm.
do. I like having a publisher get behind the book, do the marketing, do the publicity, and all of that, and set up readings and things for me. Doing this on my own would just take too much time, and I'm getting too old for that. But so I had to learn how to use social media when it started to come in. And I didn't use a computer until 1989.
Yeah.
I got a Mac Plus, and I was always typing. And in England, we couldn't afford photocopying, so I'd type multiple copies of my books, and back then you only sold one. You only could send it out one at a time to an agent, one
Oh my
agent at a time.
gosh.
Now you can go,
Yeah.
you can spray it
Right.
out there, and so I had he'd say, "Send me another copy to send to my New York agent, my associate in America," and I said, "Fine." I'd have to retype it. So, but it's coming. I got Facebook, and that's been fun because I've reconnected with some old friends and some of my former students who are now like getting into their 60s, which is kind of scary because I taught for 4 years at my old school in New York. So I graduated from this school, which was on a beautiful estate designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, who also did Central Park. And it was on this greatest. It was the first Montessori school in the country. And I was there through 8th grade through 12th grade. 7 years later, I got a teaching job there because I knew they would hire me because I'm a graduate. So I really liked my students very much, and I could teach anything I wanted. So I taught Ulysses by James Joyce.
Wow.
I taught Tolstoy. I taught Nabokov. I could do anything I wanted. Different times. These days, they would fire me immediately. Parents would, burn down my house. And but it was a very different time. And I'm still in touch with these kids. So I use that for that. But also I use Facebook just to let people know about my books, interviews, like I'm going to be telling them about this.
Yes.
They already know about this. And once we have a link, I'll send it to them. And so I use that. In Twitter, I sort of discovered, there's also this thing called Twitter.
Yeah.
So I'll do that. And my agent's on there as well. And I just use it really for professional stuff. I don't get involved in political conversations,
Right.
but I always enjoy your questions. Questions are very, very good. And so I basically use it just to promote myself a little bit, and Instagram as well.
Yeah. Social media is this really strange place. You said a couple of things I wish I could hit on a little bit more. One being the scattershot approach to literary agents. I would say the majority of people who listen to the podcast probably are more self-published at this point. If you're coming into publishing and you haven't broken through already, most people now are breaking through self-publishing. So they prove the concept themselves by self-publishing. They sell enough copies that the publisher says, yeah, we'd love to give you international distribution. And that's usually how you go into a house now, versus I had the literary agent. We queried for 3 years before I got it through my head that I have to prove I can sell this novel, which is kind of the process I'm in right now. But I think the downside to the availability of querying agents right now is that people who aren't particularly serious or have really taken the time are sending out queries, and agents get tired. And so you just have this massive level of fatigue at every stop along the juncture. I think that that's true of publishers as well. The editors who are getting agents querying them, there are so many agents, it's just a flood. And there's really no way to slow it down, but it's interesting. It's worth noting.
Yeah, I think I was talking to a friend of mine, a writer who has published one nonfiction book, straight, mainstream publishing, and he has a novel which I've mentored him, and I love the novel very, very much. So I said to him, the query letter is the important thing. It's that thing that knocks on the door and keeps knocking.
Mm-hmm.
So I sent him a copy of my query letter for The Drowning, because I had an agent prior to The Drowning for 19 years, and he only sold 2 books of mine. And he would lose my manuscripts. He'd forget to read them. And I couldn't get out of that cycle. And they finally sold Airtight to Thomas and Mercer, which is an Amazon imprint. And of course, they don't do it. They don't sell books through bookstores. Right. You can't go to a bookstore and say, I'd like to do a reading. They go, not if you're an Amazon author. Yeah. And I queried an agent at Trident, which is a big agency in Manhattan. And the agent, I wrote this really good query letter, because it begins with picture this. And I use that first paragraph of The Drowning. And I said, and that becomes the story of when he disappears. I immediately make them want to read it.
Absolutely.
And then I say, this is based on something that happened to me. And then I give my background. I published this. I had a novel that was a Barnes & Noble Discover title, sold 30,000. Great, excellent. So, I had that credentials. And the agent said, I would love to read the book. And then she said, a month later, she said, I'd love to represent it. So I immediately signed with her. And she has now branched off and runs her own agency, which is great. Awesome. But she also has a vast background of many, many years as an editor and as an agent, and especially as a foreign rights agent. She was head of foreign rights at Trident. And so she's been wonderful. And she sold 3 books of mine in 4 years.
Wow.
The Drowning, If She Were Dead, and The Summoning. And just finishing up a new novel this week and next. And when she gets back from the London Book Fair, she will see it.
Awesome. So we'll stop and talk about The Summoning real quick. That's the other of your novels that I read. And that one interests me, even from the perspective of the reviews on Amazon. I think that you pissed some people off.
I never read Amazon reviews. I have to tell you,
and that's okay. I'm not actually going to pick anything apart. What I really love about it is that there were people who felt like as confused as you're supposed to feel as you're running through this, because there are elements of the supernatural inside of the book that are undeniably supernatural, and it takes a little while for the reader to settle in and say, like, yes, this really is supernatural. It's not somebody having kind of like a psychotic break or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, this is something I do. I don't read thrillers. I have to be very honest with you. Yeah. I like to watch them on television. I like to watch them as movies. I just don't read them because I don't want to be influenced by them. But I think that people, when they read thrillers, they have expectations.
Yes.
We're going to get this, we're going to get this, we're going to get this, and then we're going to get the answer at the end. There aren't always answers in real life, So I try to keep my stuff, all of my stuff is very different. I mean, right now I'm finishing a novel called The Rule of Thirds. And there are 4 main characters in it. There's a detective, there's a pop star, there's a thriller writer, and there is a damaged former war photographer whose memory is extremely shaky because of something that happened to him in Afghanistan. So he sees things that are not there, he hears things that are not there, and his daughter has disappeared. And so that you have these 4 people playing against each other and with each other and that sort of thing. But you will get an answer at the end. Yeah. But in The Summoning, you get an answer, but it's not the kind of expectations that people want in a thriller.
Yeah,
they want it laid out.
That may be true. I think what I saw was that people in the most fun way, had a really hard time accepting that there was magic. And the people who enjoyed the magic, you would just see them be delighted by the book. I think it was my feeling as well. And you have, I'm not going to give away anything for people who want to read your books, but you have the love interest in the book, which is a little bit heartbreaking. I think it's fair enough to say that it's a little bit heartbreaking in a fun way.
Sure.
So yeah. I really enjoyed it. I will definitely be reading more of your books because I like your style, and I like the fact that you have a literary background. So I went through grad school at Eastern Washington University with Sam Ligon and Greg Spatz. Sam, amazing writer. Guys taught me how to do so much. I'm so grateful for it. They were not willing, I would say, for the most part, to step away from literary fiction. And I think that was another area where the educational track for writers is starting to veer away from what we're seeing in current writing in a way that's maybe a little bit destructive. More people are doing what you're doing, blending genre into literary. And that's my favorite stuff. When I'm able to find a writer who has literary chops, you can feel that they care about the sentencing, the grammar, the character development, when it's people first and they still are robust with their story. That's really exciting to me. And I think we're going to see even more of that going forward, where you're blending a lot of different genres into literary. Why did you start doing that?
I learned that actually. Well, I tell you, I learned it from back in England. I read Proust in English, all of it. And then I thought, I want to read him in French. So I started learning French. I had French in high school and in college, but I started learning French. And I started reading Patrick Modiano, the Nobel laureate of 3 years ago. And he's actually one of my very favorite authors. And his books are sort of semi-autobiographical, but they all are detective stories in one way or another. And they're very short novels. Some of them are short as like 140 pages, 130 pages, but he blends genre. And then I discovered a writer called René Beletta, who's become a friend of 30 years now. And he wrote novels that are literary novels, but have thriller aspects to them and detective aspects to them. And I thought, this is different. I have not seen this in American or even British writing. And I thought, you know what? This is good. I can actually do this. And then when I started writing scripts, and I've been writing scripts for years. I haven't done that for a few years now because I'm just too busy with books. When I started writing scripts, I started to write thrillers because you really have to be branded with a genre in the movie business and in television. And that taught me a lot about pacing. It taught me a lot about structure, which I could translate into my books. So The Drowning began as a script, and then I fleshed it out as a novel, and it changed in many ways. The Summoning also was a script and became a novel, and a much better novel than it was a script. So that's where I learned all that from. So blending genres is very important. You mentioned that the people are important. Character is my number one. Character creates story. And that's very, very important to me. And I like doing character work. Everything I do is based on character rather than purely plot. So in The Summoning, Kit Capriol, I'm interested in her character. I basically was very influenced by two movies, Seance on a Wet Afternoon, which was Brian Forbes' movie of 1963, and I saw it that week it opened. It's about this husband and wife, and they get involved in a scheme to kidnap, and I don't know if you've seen it, kidnap a schoolgirl. And then they're going to say is we're going to take her, chloroform her, we'll put her in a room here, make her think she's in a hospital. You're going to be the nurse. And then we're going to put out feelers to the parents saying, we're going to help find your child. Oh, wow. And then suddenly at the end, the real supernatural breaks in. I'm not going to give it away because it's a fabulous movie. And then there was another movie, Nicholas Roeg's Don't Look Now, with Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland. Okay. And that's about grief. They lose a daughter who drowns, and they go to Venice to reclaim it. But it's about mediums, and it's about death and how we become reconciled to death. And it's a very moving psychological thriller, and very influenced by them. And I thought, I started to write a novel about a medium back in England, and I couldn't get it going. And now I could do it. But an interviewer once on a Zoom interview said, I think that your character, Kit, she has a foot in each world, the world of the living
Absolutely.
and the world of the dead.
Yeah.
Her husband died in the North Tower on 9/11, and she's got this kind of foot in each. It's a twilight place she lives in, so that she thinks she's just running this scheme, this
Yeah, that's what I was
racket.
going to say. She's another character that you don't particularly love for the fact that she is intentionally swindling people who are going through grief, like kind of the worst time to swindle somebody, and yet she's experienced it herself. So,
right, and she's helping people. This the great thing is that she helps people. They feel reassured by her, and I mean, like after World War I in Britain, mediums were huge because people had lost their sons and their husbands. So they were lining up to see mediums and they would be reassured. Your husband or your son is he's well, he's in another world, you will meet him one day. Oh, and here's his voice. You see, so she does that with the Irish woman and she does it with the accent and everything because she's an actor. So that's that character that has, you could see her two different ways. You could say, oh, she's kind of despicable. And then you think, no, but she's really helping people.
I know.
That's
life and that's character. Yeah, exactly. If you are able to grab a character who has the side of them that's likable and not likable. My wife and I have been having this conversation because in the second book in my detective series, the main character has lost the person that she loves the most, but not in the way that you think. And so she's going through grief and it makes her a horrible person, like insufferable. And my wife is like, I don't know if anybody's going to be able to read this novel because she's so bad. And I said, don't worry, babe, I'll figure it out. I will make her likable. But if you can't write a character who's able to suffer the full realm of grief over something that is truly grief worthy, then you don't have a great book.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And it's kind of fun because I think that the summoning, it touches upon things that, I mean, we're all sort of aware we're going to die. I have more years behind me than I have ahead of me, I'll be honest with you. So I think about this, now and again, more like now rather than again. But, I'm very aware of it. So I could put some of that into it as well. But I've also sort of gotten away from writing that kind of thing. I'm trying to create, every book has to be new for me. And it has to be different. All of my books are very different. My fourth novel, which was until The Drowning, my most successful, was called The Discovery of Light. And it's a contemporary thriller. It's a mystery story about a man whose wife has died. Was it suicide or was it murder? And it's also about the painter Vermeer, because she loved Vermeer and she was writing about Vermeer. So there are chapters interleaved in that novel about Johannes Vermeer and his paintings, the stillness and the mystery and the enigma of his paintings. How do you read these things? And if you notice in The Summoning, there is a character in there who has died, who was writing a paper on Vermeer. The woman, the docent at the Metropolitan Museum. So I used some of the things that I used in The Discovery of Light and brought them in there because there's all these little mysteries in Vermeer's paintings, things that have been painted out. And Dutch painting is full of emblems, things, little symbols and things. And they knew how to read them, and we are learning how to read them.
Now, if I recall right, I don't know a ton about Vermeer. I've seen his work at different times, but there's something about blue in Vermeer. Is that right? I mean, he has a connection to blue, or is it just that he's known for working with many different blues?
I think he is. I'm not seeing a lot of. I'm not seeing that as much.
Okay.
Blue may have been a very common, wall color or something like that. Vermeer is very famous, of course. Proust made him very famous in The View of Delft, which is in The Hague, and I've seen it there. It's beautiful, and it's this little patch of yellow wall, and a character in Proust's novel goes to the museum to look at this, and he goes, "Oh, little patch of yellow wall. How perfect that is. If only I could have written that way." And then he drops dead. And you look at the yellow wall and it just glows, when you see it alive. But yeah, it's, painting is important to me. I can't paint. I can't draw to save my life, but painting is important because it's a mystery.
Yeah.
Often it's a mystery. A good photograph is a mystery. Diane Arbus once said, a photograph is a secret about a secret. That's the epigraph to my new novel. It's a secret about a secret. You don't. You're distant from it. You're not there, but it's very hard. Where are we? You're in that intermediate zone of understanding and not understanding, and I find that very interesting.
Yeah.
This kind of, I think fiction works the same way.
So I want to talk to you about something. This is a bit of a departure from what we've been talking about, but it just occurred to me as I was listening to you speak. You have a level of confidence about you, and self-assured that you should for your years of success. How would this conversation be different if you were at the beginning of your career? Put yourself in my shoes, where you've had an agent, you failed, you're back before you've gone to England, and your stuff is good, but you haven't had that validation in any level. How would you be talking to the audience right now? What would you say to the listeners about the journey ahead?
Okay, the looking back now, I would say back then I thought, oh, you write a book, you send it to a publisher, they publish it. It's the simplest thing in the world. It's like magic. It's not. As we all discovered, it's a long, hard road, but that's a good road. It's an apprenticeship because you're always writing. And I was writing a book a year. If I failed, I wrote another book. Failed. The minute I finish a book, the next day I start a new book. Iris Murdoch taught me that. I always say to people, you've got to, it's a competitive field. There are I don't know how many thousands of books published a year. You can do this though. It's like trying to be a rock star. There are lots of bands out there, and a lot of them began in your garage or your basement, and they became, REM.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
Or something, or the Talking Heads at art school, and they're having fun. But you work and work at it, and you have something new to say, especially in genre. If you're writing detective, and I know you're writing detective, if you could take a slightly different angle, and I take a very different angle in my thrillers, because I'm not writing that sort of, one step at a time kind of a thriller. I'm doing something very different, and especially with psychological thriller. So I'm playing with minds and perception. What's real? What's not real? And what's really happening? So you want to keep readers constantly on their toes. That's what's interesting to me. But I think telling a young writer, you can't just write one book and quit.
Oh, definitely.
It didn't happen. You got to keep. Again, you got to write. As I said, I wrote 12.
Yeah.
13th was my first novel. I wrote it in 5 weeks. We had moved back from England. I sat down and I wrote it, and I sent it to my agent. Boom, done. And it was sold.
That's wild.
To a major publisher in Britain. It was great.
Yeah.
So it's just because you get really good at it.
Yeah.
It doesn't take me 5 weeks now to write a book. Although this book I'm writing now, it's 4 months it took me, which was very, very fast for me. It just sort of rolled out.
Yeah, there are books that are like that. The one that I just finished is like that. I still have revisions yet to go, but it was really interesting. I tried a brand new way of writing. I've never been a person to outline because I fell for the idea that you can't be surprised if you know what's coming, but that ends up being very not true. You are hugely surprised by what the characters will do when you have a framework for them to act inside of.
That's right. In movies, what I always say about writing scripts is that it's like building a jigsaw puzzle. You know what the picture looks like. And then what you do is take it apart and you give it to your viewers, this little bit of time, this little bit of time. I don't outline my novels. I have a vague idea where they're going to go, and that always changes. That midway through the book, it always changes because something else comes up and you go, oh, that's interesting. Let's follow that. And if it works, you go, okay, we can do this. So I like that adventure of writing. It keeps me from not being bored with it. Nothing worse than being bored with it.
That is very true. I wrote some people tell me that this is not actually an outline, but I wrote 20,000 word draft of the book so that I understood the action that happened inside and what needed to happen within chapters. So I broke it down into chapters. Then when I actually wrote the second draft, or, if whatever you would call the first draft off the outline, chapters changed where I'd be like, that doesn't need its own chapter to tell that. I don't know why I thought that needed its own chapter, or, I completely omit this because I'd rather do this. But having that sense of, okay, I really see this picture helped so much. Saved me a lot of time too. The first book in the series took me 5 years. This one took me 8 weeks. So
There you go. There you go. And you know, and it will show, because it will show that you're confident
Yeah.
and that you're enjoying it. And that translates to
Mm-hmm.
readers. That's another thing that young writers have to understand, is that the way you're feeling when you're writing it.
Yeah.
If you're feeling like the world owes me this publication, it's going to show up in the writing. And editors get very turned off by that.
That's fascinating. I've never really thought about that before. I need to reflect on it, because I do think that there's a part of me that feels entitled. I know I've put in the work. I wonder if that is showing up in ways.
Probably at your stage, no, because you're there now. You're writing, and it's coming out, you know?
Yeah.
So you're past that stage, you know. But I think a lot, especially very young people, you know, you owe me a living. Kind of thing.
Yes.
Listen, we're the best band in town.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to be the best bass player in the East Coast. No, you're not, but you're going to be good, you know.
Yeah.
And there's a point when, as a writer, you don't say, I'm going to be a bestseller, I'm going to win the Nobel Prize. You just say, I really love my stuff. I love this life, and I enjoy seeing my book in print.
Yeah.
And that's all you can. And if you have some sales and you get some foreign sales, great. That's great. I never read Amazon. I never read reviews online unless they're in the press.
Okay.
Publishers Weekly, you know, or in France. I avoid those like the plague, because I got turned off, because when I had Airtight was published, one woman wrote and I was reading them on Amazon, and she said, I couldn't download the book to my Kindle, 1 star. And I'm thinking, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to come out in the night and kill you. And it's just, and I wrote Amazon. I said, why do you allow that? Why do you allow them to punish the author for a technical issue on your end, you know? And they never heard from them. So I thought, I'm done. I can't do this, because either you beat yourself up. So people, you should not read your Amazon reviews or your Goodreads reviews all the time, because it will drive you insane.
Right.
How people will misunderstand your work.
Yes.
And you want to reach out and grab them and say, listen to me, you got it wrong. You know?
Yeah.
You know?
I have a lot of fun. So there's a couple of ways where I feel a little bit differently. One, critical reviews hurt me a little bit more if they're not fairly positive about my work, because I expect the critics to like vibe. That's not the word I want to use, but it's the one that came to mind with what I'm doing. Whereas the random stranger on Amazon who's like, yeah, I don't understand this book. That guy eats way too much. Nobody could ever eat that much food. I'm like, yeah, that's on purpose. Keep reading and you'll understand why that's happening.
Right.
So
exactly.
those kind of like slough off me.
Or the ones who,
Yeah.
It's like people who find, well, this doesn't really happen in a police station. I don't care. I make everything up. I don't research stuff. But my job is to convince you that I know what I'm talking about.
I'm so glad you said that. I need to talk with more authors about that exact thing, because I do a little bit of research, but a sad amount of my research comes straight from TV. I'm like, hey, if I bought it on TV, it's good enough for my novel.
You got, that's exactly right. It's exactly right. It's making your stuff so convincing. And you don't have to make up words or terms or anything like that. It's just, you just sound confident.
Yes.
You know, I have a detective, a middle-aged detective in this novel I'm writing now, and he's a great character. He just came right out of my head, and he comes right to life. And he's doing stuff in the police station for this guy. I have no idea if this is legitimate, if this is how they operate. But if I can convince my readers that this is real, then they'll buy it.
Yes. So you
and keep them engaged. This one of the other things. I was kind of amazed at when I wrote The Drowning. I'd never had this happen before. People would say to me, I couldn't stop turning the pages. I finished a chapter. I had to read the next one. I had to read the next. I had to read the next one. I had to read the next one. I thought, that's a novelty in my life, because when you write literary fiction, you know, people read a few paragraphs and go to sleep, you know, and pick it up the next night, you know. And literary fiction can have its own gripping quality to it. I was very influenced. It was funny. There was a book. I was once in a Borders bookstore, and there was a Danish novel, and it was on the. And I looked at the flap, and inside the flap he writes like John Hawkes, Alain Robbe-Grillet, and J.P. Smith, and I got
that's amazing.
I got to see who this guy's work is. And I thought, he's right. This guy very much akin to what I do, and Robbe-Grillet was a big influence on me for quite a while. So a lot of French writers, because I could steal from them and nobody would. No, we all steal.
Absolutely.
You know? but yeah, I mean, there's a certain kind of John Hawkes is kind of this unclassifiable writer. I don't even know if anybody reads him anymore. Very popular back in the 60s and 70s. Yeah. Rob Grier, was very big then. And then this made, so it was nice to see that on the book. So I read the book. I thought, this is great. This is good. It's a little like what I'm doing here, because I had done this book called The Blue Hour, which was big. It got a lot of attention, a lot of film attention.
Oh, nice.
And it was optioned. And a script was written, not by me, and it was cast. We had a cast, except for our leading man. And we had a director and a shoot date in Paris. It's basically, it's a retelling of the Orpheus myth.
Okay.
And I thought I'll use a myth, because until then, I was never very good at plot. So I'd have to fudge it a little bit. But I thought if I choose an armature of a myth, I can build a novel, a contemporary novel, based on the Orpheus and Eurydice myth. And I wrote the thing. People wanted to film this thing. Dino De Laurentiis. I mean, everybody wanted to do this. And we sold the rights. A man optioned it. And, he wrote a script, which I thought it was all right. And we had everybody but our leading man, Daniel Day-Lewis, wanted to be in it. But he wanted his girlfriend at the time to play opposite him, Isabelle Adjani. And I said, oh, she's perfect. No, I don't want her.
Oh, wow.
Great. So we had Julie Delpy. We had good people
really
in there. But what happened was that he didn't decide on the leading man, and the financing started to drift away. So, but that became, was as a filmable work. And it's hard to sell film rights these days.
Yes.
I always thought The Drowning would be, it's a film. It'll be a film. Not yet. Somebody will pick it up one day. Yeah. But it's very hard to do that. And that's where the money is in publishing. Yeah. Sub-rights. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because advances are getting smaller.
Yes. Yeah, that's what we didn't talk about, and what we won't have time to talk about in this particular conversation. I'd love to have you back, but what we didn't get to talk about is the money side of things, because that's the one other area. I have referenced a couple of my guests many, many times, Robin and Michael J. Sullivan. He writes the books. She has been his marketing arm, and they had just a great run writing in traditional publishing. But it came to the point where they could make more money self-publishing, and she was willing to do that work and run the Kickstarters and basically, bootstrap an audience. And I mean, they're making a ludicrous amount of money, and I think that they're pretty proud of that. And so they don't like give figures, but they talk about it. And their books have not been made into movies or film or optioned or anything like that. They just have this rabid following of readers that will grab everything that he writes. And I mean, that's my dream. I would love to see my books made into movies, because I really have an affection for TV and film. But at the same time, what I want so desperately, another of my guests, she got mixed reviews from some of my close circle, Libby Hawker. But she says, you know what I do? I wake up in the morning and I write for 5 hours. And then I put my computer away and I go sit out on the beach and I look at the water and I smoke pot and read a book. And I said,
there you go. That
sounds like my life. Like, how am I not living that life?
I write all day. Yeah. I mean, I go to the gym, for a couple of hours in the middle of the day. And then sometimes at night, I wake up with an idea, and I once dreamt an entire novel back after my first novel was published. I woke up with a title and a novel and I wrote it. Didn't get it published, but I wrote it.
I love it. This is a perfect spot to close this conversation, partly because my wife decided I probably need to be done and started the vacuum. Recording a podcast in the house, it's got its benefits. I did want to leave off. You said that you learned French so that you could read Swan Song and the rest of Proust in French. So I bought this book by Roberto Bolaño, Nocturno de Chile.
I love him,
and I am still working on understanding Spanish well enough to read it. But I bought that book years ago, and I keep studying Spanish. So I wanted you to take some parting comments on how you think that learning another language, even just if you're fluent in reading, not necessarily speaking, has impacted what you write and how you write.
Well, I think learning French, I read Proust again in French. It's just a very different experience. It's a very muscular prose in French in the way that the translation doesn't always have that. By the way, I'm a big Bolaño fan. I've read all of him. I've reviewed a lot of his books for the Nervous Breakdown online
Oh, so
website.
you're friends with Brad
And-
Listy then? Brad was
Hmm?
on the show a while ago. Yeah.
Okay. And I reread 2666 last summer after having read it when it first
Love it.
came out. And I'm a big fan of Bolaño. I think reading in French is very good. It's a way, it's like having a cold drink of water away from what you're doing. Because, when you're writing all the time, sometimes you're drinking a mud milkshake. You're so into your own stuff and you just want to get away from that prose.
Yeah.
So, I'll reread Modiano, very short novels. It's very easy French, and it will refresh me, but it will also give me a sense of, because Modiano says more when he's not saying anything. It's what he leaves out that actually matters. It's like that line in the movie Almost Famous, it's what you leave out that matters, the rock star says to the kid. And that's true. Modiano is very good at that. And I find that my style, I've been very influenced by the French stylistically, but also it takes you out of yourself. And I think that's very important as a writer. I don't read my genre. That's important. I'm rereading, I think for the 5th time now, Under the Volcano.
Oh, great book.
By Malcolm Lowry.
Yes. Dennis Johnson cites that as like the reason for him, which Dennis Johnson's my hero. He's like,
yeah, it's a great book, and I'm rereading. This is my 5th reading of it. I read it every 2 years. It's just
it's funny that you mentioned
book.
that and the idea of what's not said, because I think The Volcano is only truly a good book when you understand that you have to really pay attention to what's not said. I mean, that's I think
that's what it's all about.
Book.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's kind of key. And I think as young authors, it's like the packing the trunk thing. I can't read Salman Rushdie's work. And I'll tell you why. Because he packs that trunk so full of clothes. But it's like when you travel, don't overpack. You can pick up some things along the way. You can go shopping. They have stores there. But I remember when Midnight's Children came out, and I was living in England, and I opened it and I read the first page, and I said, I can't read this. It's like too much of a meal right away, And I've never been able to read him. And when I was a Viking author, my editor sent, he wrote a young adult book for his kids. And my daughter was she was 13. So she said, would you read this to me? And I thought, this is good. The first chapter is good. This is good Salman Rushdie. And then after that, you get into this, this mess, this stew that's just overfull.
Yeah.
It's overfilling. And it's just you saying, I don't care about these people anymore. But I think it's when you leave out things, that's very important. The Summoning doesn't tell you everything. The Drowning doesn't tell you. The most important character in The Drowning is Marty, the filmmaker.
Right.
Because The Drowning is, hint, hint, it's really about the manipulation of people with art.
Yes.
There are scenes in there that are in a slightly different font that tell you that this is a movie. That part is from a movie that's being made. And so, well, I'm not going to give away too much, but that's what it's really about. What's the book really about? Well, it's about that, really. There's a revenge aspect, but it's also about that. So I think that's kind of fun, is when you have these different layers of things, and you can just do it very lightly. You just slip it in.
It's been so much fun talking to you. People know where to find your books. I will have links to them in my show notes. Do you want them to connect with you on Twitter, or is there somewhere that you prefer to connect with readers if they want to interact?
They can come to my website, jpsmith.org. They can contact me. They can write me through there. They can go through there. They can go to Facebook, just JP Smith. They can go through Twitter. Yes, absolutely. Instagram. And if you will let me know what the link to this is, I'm going to be everybody wants to hear it. So perfect. I'm going to put it on all social media. Awesome. This has been great.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. So let's keep in touch. I look forward to further conversations.
I really enjoyed this, Jody. Yeah. You're an excellent interviewer.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Take care. Thank you for listening to TRBM. The theme music was provided by the ever-talented Christopher Talon. And hey, if you liked what you heard, share this show with other readers, because what's the point of telling stories if nobody's listening?